How do you like our little active music there, a little energy getter?
That was slick. I liked it.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeffrey Haskell. We're excited to be interviewing you. Of course, I'm Z, and there's Ali over in the UK joining us. Ali has actually been writing in fantasy as her chosen genre this year, and I'm a romance author. So we have a little bit of mixed group of people who follow us in different genres, but we're really excited to have you joining us and answering all of our questions, our burning questions.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I love helping people and talking books and authoring and all that stuff, and it's always exciting. And I've got author friends in all the genres, so romance, urban fantasy, you name it. So I've got friends everywhere. So I think all genres are great.
The author community is great, that's for sure. Well, let's start out. I mean, obviously, people might not know a lot about you, so why don't you start out by telling us how you got started being an author and a little bit about your journey?
Sure, absolutely. I'm at home right now, so bear with me on the occasional child. I've got 4 kids, and so the occasional interruption is going to happen. Um, boy, my author journey started, well, like a lot of people, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a creative type, a writer of some kind. I used to write my own stuff. I remember writing stuff when I was in high school, but as I became an adult, when I was a kid back in the 80s and 90s, writing wasn't really something you could do without like a lot of education and degree and stuff like that, or a great deal of luck. And so, it didn't work out, and I went on to have other jobs that I did. But about 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to do some writing for somebody on Upwork, and they really, really liked it, and which surprised me because, I had been told for a long time that I wasn't very good. And so after they kept coming back and asking me for the next piece so they could sell it, my brilliant wife, said, why don't we just cut out the middleman and you can just write your own stuff? And so I did. And starting on May 13th of 2015, I got up every morning at 5 a.m. and I started writing. And I completed a book. It took me 6 months to write my first book. It wasn't technically my first book, but it was my first readable, work.
Something you wouldn't be embarrassed to put out there.
Yeah. And it was in the urban fantasy genre, and which I really like. And then I wrote 2 more sequels. The second one only took me like 3 months to write, and the third one I did it in a month. And I was about to self-publish them when I saw the Kindle Scout program. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's gone now, but they used to have this program that lets you submit manuscripts and compete basically for being published. And I put my manuscript in, and they selected it, and so it was published. And for about 2 years, I was an Amazon published author. But nobody bought the follow-ups, which is really tells you. Well, they bought the second one, but nobody bought the third one, which tells you they didn't like the second one. And with good reason. I was really enamored with The Walking Dead at the time, so there was a lot more zombies in it than probably urban fantasy crowd likes. And from there, I started writing some military sci-fi stuff in Kindle Worlds, and I really like military sci-fi. It's the genre I always wanted to write, but I wanted to be really good when I did it. And then I had this idea for a superhero book, and so I wrote the superhero book, and that one took off. People really liked that one. And so I kept writing in that series, which is the Full Metal Superhero series, and there's 9 books total in that series, and it's ended. And then about halfway through that series, I launched a second series called The Wraith, Superhero by Night, which is more of a Batman vigilante / Punisher kind of superhero tale. And that one does really good too. And in fact, I'm about to release the 5th one in that series. And both series were picked up on audio by Tanto Media. So they got a full series run on both of them doing audio. And I had a lot of help along the way. I reached out to a lot of authors that I really admire, like Lindsay Buroker and Chris Fox. And I'm a big firm believer of dress for the job you want. Well, hang out with the authors you want to be like. And while everybody has a different path to how they become successful, you can see what they do to get there and mimic that, if not their specific actions. Like a lot of people wrote military sci-fi because Chris Fox wrote military sci-fi, but I mean, like but the thing that the people didn't do was they didn't be like Chris and get up at 5 a.m. every morning and write for 6 hours and, get the words in and release books on a regular schedule and that kind of thing. And I found the biggest indicator of success in an author is their willingness to do the work. And the second biggest indicator is their ability to put out work on a regular basis. And whether that's once a week, like some people can, not me, or twice a year, that's the important bit, is doing the work and putting it out there.
I love that. And I think that's something that a lot of our authors in our group espouse for sure, is getting your work out there. We're not just writing for fun. It is fun, but we actually do have goals to self-publish and put it out there and get that.
Yeah, it's the best job I've ever had.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a lot.
Speaking of jobs, I was going to say, speaking of jobs, and I don't know, Allie, what you have thought about this, but the Superhero by Night series there's a lot of technology in there, like a lot of engineering and a lot of interesting
The first
things.
one, the Arsenal one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The one with the armor. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wondered, okay, either you had former careers that you were really science and engineering specific, or you were really good at researching some of those things and, figuring out how to creatively put it into your book and make up things that sounded like they were real things.
Well, I've been reading science fiction my whole life, and science fiction in a lot of cases is a precursor to science fact. But when you read science fiction, specifically the stuff that explores the science, not necessarily just made up science, which is totally cool, but like the stuff that says, okay, this is what we can do now. What happens if we took it just a little bit further? You end up getting a pretty good understanding of how things work. And so to answer your question in the short way, I'm not a scientist, and I have never worked in a STEM field. I did help desk. I was a help desk technician for most of my career before I became a writer. However, I love science and technology and engineering, and I love reading about it. And I've read I've read hundreds, if not thousands, of science fiction books in my life. So all that's rattling around in here somewhere, plus all the TV shows and then just doing my own research because something is interesting and cool. Arsenal has a lot of quantum technology in it because quantum physics is really interesting to me. The way it argues, the way it is against regular physics. Like the energy physics and quantum physics do not agree on how things work, and that to me is extremely interesting. So. So I do a lot of research, and a lot of the stuff I just know because I've read about it my whole life. And with superheroes, it's really interesting. You have a lot of leeway. Well, with any fantastical genre, you have a lot of leeway, but the less you can make up, the better. Because when you do have to make something up, people will be more likely to believe it if everything else is grounded in reality. So it's superheroes, and she wears a suit of armor and she flies around and she has an energy source that can't exist, but we theorize it exists, called 0 point. But the physics is still there. The physics of our Earth is still there. She still has weight. She still needs a wheelchair when she's not in her armor, that kind of thing. So the particle cannons work the way particle cannons would really work, and the mass drivers and all that stuff. Everything works the way it would regularly work, based on our understanding, current knowledge of physics. And then there's the couple of things that I had to make up in order for her armor to work at all. Kind of like Tony's arc reactor. For her, it's her kinetic shields. It's the ability to absorb kinetic energy and redistribute it and use it to power other weapons. There's no sort of freezing things. There's no mechanism for that. So that's 100%. Made up, so to speak. But just about everything else, even the alloy her armor is made of, is based in real stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing how you interspersed all of that into a cohesive story that even someone like me, who is not scientific, could really enjoy, and grasp onto the challenges that she experienced and what she had to go through.
Well, that's the goal, right? Is when you're writing something, is to be accessible to everybody, but while still giving people who are specifically fans of that genre what they want. And I'll be the first person to tell you, I get a little too sciencey sometimes. I have this author friend named L. Richmond, and she writes science fiction. And she's an actual scientist. She's got a degree in physics, and her husband's got a PhD in physics. And she sent me something to read, and she's like, "My husband said it was too sciencey," and I read it, and I was like, "No, it's perfect." So I do try to keep an eye out for that when I'm doing it. Like for Wraith, since she's a vigilante, there's hardly any science in it at all. It's all just
emotions.
Yeah, it's all Punisher-esque, killing of the bad guys. But yeah, it's important when you're writing something to know who your audience is, which is probably like the single most important thing you can know writing a book is who's going to be reading it. But also bear in mind you want to keep it in such a way that people who could be fans of the genre would enjoy it. Now, someone who doesn't like superheroes and comic books is never going to like my books. And if they do like them, it's going to be like, well, I would have liked your book, but it had this in it, or it's a superhero book, but your characters are good, that kind of thing. But if you are a fan of superheroes or you're a fan of action adventure, that kind of thing, then you're going to like it. You're really going to like it. There's nothing about it that says specifically this. The thing that most superhero novels fall into the trap is they get campy. And that's because a lot of people grew up on campy superhero movies. And so they write these campy superhero books. And I grew up on serious superhero comics. And so I write serious superhero books. Doesn't mean they're not funny and there isn't romance and stuff like that. It just means that they take themselves seriously in the context of the book.
Yeah. What was the first year you published the first Superhero by Night book?
Well, the first superhero book I published was the Full Metal Superhero Book 1, and that was June 2017. And then the first Superhero by Night book was November 2018.
Did it take you a while to find your audience when you put those books out? Like you say, it's a specific. They have to like superheroes, not have to, but this is a profile of your reader.
No, they have to. Really, they do. I've done a lot of reader research, a lot of genre research, and because again, know your genre. So you have to really like superheroes, otherwise they're not going to read it. And I've done the research on this. It's really pans out. The people who don't like superheroes will not pick up a superhero novel. They might not like mystery novels, and they'll pick up a mystery novel because they're bored, but they will never pick up a superhero novel. There's just something about superheroes that if you don't already like them, you're not reading them. Yeah. Finding your audience is a little tricky. It's both difficult and incredibly easy at the same time. You just have to be willing to give up some of your creative control of your ideas a little bit. And when you are writing your books, you have to know who you're writing them for. You have to know who that audience is, and you have to give them what they want. Instead of like, well, I'm going to subvert the genre, and this goes for any genre. I'm going to subvert the genre, or I'm going to surprise them with a twist that shows you how ridiculous this genre is, or something like that. And that starts with loving the genre. And we've all seen movies and read books where you're reading it and you're like, clearly you have contempt for your readers or viewers. I could think of a Star Wars movie that did that. And so the big thing to remember is knowing who your audience is, giving them what they want. And then, the way you find those people after you've written the book that they want is through your cover. Your cover has to scream that the genre you're in. I mean, when you look at my books, you automatically know they're superhero books, mostly because of the cover, like 90% of the cover. But if there's any doubt, then you look at the title, and in this book series, it's Full Metal Superhero and Superhero by Night. So you have to really go to that length. You have to spell it out for them and let them know, like, hey, this book here, this one right here, this one's for you. So, and romance authors have this nailed. They have this down to a T. You will never, if you have a doubt that it's a romance novel, it's not a romance novel.
Yeah.
Or not a very good one. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of blatant kind of cover you have to have. Yeah, the art can be great, and mine is, because my wife has been an amazing artist her whole life. And so when I started publishing, she started doing covers. Well, she did covers long before I started publishing. And when I started publishing, she started doing covers for me. And they're just perfect.
They really are. I was actually going to touch on covers, so I'm glad you segued into this, because they're beautiful. They're beautiful in their own right, poster worthy.
Yeah, they are. And I've got a couple of posters of them. And there really is nothing. if you might sell books if you have a bad cover, but if you do, it's because you got lucky or something weird happened. But having a great cover is step one into being a successful author or having a successful book. Because if the cover is what tells people what genre it is and what the book is about, and you have 3 seconds to communicate that, 3 seconds of someone on their phone flipping through all the thumbnails, because that's like 80% of people buy books on their phone.
Interest.
Yeah,
Right.
and you do that with a professional artist who knows color composition and design and marketing and stuff like that. And I got really lucky with my wife because she's been an artist her whole life, and she was a graphic designer long before she was a cover designer.
Wow.
And so
yeah,
it really worked out. So you got to have a great cover. And I'm going to throw a shout out.
Shout out to your wife.
She runs a website called vividcovers.com.
Okay.
And that's where you can buy her covers.
Oh, that's amazing. So we're going to circle back to content, but now that we've covered covers, I also want to talk about the other puzzle in all the pieces that it takes to grab somebody's attention, which is I started reading your blurbs. And I love your blurbs. They're short and they're punchy and they have cool lines like, let me see, 60,000 words of badassery done right. That one. And then the other one, if Punisher and Batman had a baby raised by John Wick. I mean, I just thought your blurbs were fantastic. I don't know if you wrote them or if you hired somebody, but that's one piece of the puzzle too, to get readers to buy is, the cover, like you say, 3 seconds, boom, are they interested? And then they might read the blurb, and if it's fascinating, you've got a deal.
No, you're absolutely 100% right. I wrote those blurbs, but I've always been a bit of a copywriter myself. Anyways, the sort of fast, punchy action kind of thing that you might see in a TV guide or something like that. But I also read Brian Cohen's book on writing blurbs. So if you don't know who Brian Cohen is, he's probably the greatest single blurb writer in the world.
Wow.
And he didn't write any of my blurbs, but after reading his book, I rewrote all of my blurbs to be better fit for his stuff, his style. And it really helped. And, a good blurb is really important. Dave Chesson, who runs Kindlepreneur, which is a website that does all kinds of author information, he actually spent a bunch of money and did a study with over 1,000 participants and had them walk into a situation where they sat down at a computer and they had to buy a book. And what they did was, what he found is, and he used cameras to track their eyes. And what he found is they looked at the cover, they looked at the blurb, and they clicked buy. They didn't look at reviews. They didn't scroll down. They didn't look at titles. They looked at the cover, the blurb, and then they bought. And I think that was 95% of the people who participated in the study. Wow. And it was over 1,000 people. Yeah. So that tells you how important your cover and your blurb is.
What amazes me is how short your blurbs are, at least at the beginning of Full Metal Superhero. I mean, it was like not even a paragraph, but it catches your attention. I would have totally bought. It was that cool. It was just really neat to read something short. Usually there's like a whole summary and there's a lot going on.
Summaries are bad. Yeah. Your book is for telling the story, right? Like the book you wrote, that tells the story of the book. And here's a neat little secret for covers and blurbs. They don't even have to be accurate. They really don't. Arsenal Book 1 doesn't really have anything to do with her being famous. That's not what the story's about. But it does happen in the course of the book, but it's just not what the story's about. However, it's a catchy little title.
Right.
There actually is no scene in the book that matches the cover of the book. But that doesn't really matter because the purpose of the cover and the purpose of the blurb is to get people to buy the book. And the book is supposed to then get them to buy the next book. So nobody gets to the end of the book and says, wow, the blurb was totally misleading unless it's the wrong kind of blurb for the genre, And with keeping it short, keeping it just a paragraph or two, at least with book ones, is really important because people just don't want to read 6, paragraphs of a blurb when they're looking for a book to shop. They're not going to do it. It's not that they won't. It's not that they can't. They won't. So you have to. What I do is what Brian Cohen says to do. Again, following his book, is you keep the tagline and maybe the first sentence above the show more button, so that when they read that, they want to see more. And getting them to click show more actually has a psychological effect that makes it easier for them to then click the buy button because they've already clicked.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's a nice little trick.
Allie, do you have any?
Buying my books.
Allie, do you have any questions before I go on to another one?
Oh, no, go. I've lost track completely of what I was.
Okay. Hopefully we'll hit on everything you wanted to hit on.
I think you will.
And so back to the content, I do have to say that I liked that you have a female superhero. And I wanted to just have you walk through your decision on doing something which probably, back then, especially amid all the Marvel movies that were out, which I've seen every single one, love them. But it was great toward the end of Marvel to see more and more female representation. And so I didn't know your decision making behind that, especially also considering that Amelia was in a wheelchair, a paraplegic, and she was basically defeating her boundaries of her wheelchair by going through and, everything she was doing to be a superhero. And so I just wanted to hear your thought process on how this started out. Did you plan to do it, or did you just sit down and write and suddenly a female came out, or, what was your thought process behind it?
Well, having grown up reading comics, it's kind of strange because it's almost like you live in a different world when you grew up reading comic books versus the rest of the world. Because for me, having a female superhero is not that big of a deal because there's so many of them in comic books. I mean, Wonder Woman dates back to the 1950s. I'm always a huge fan of Diana. You got the original Captain Marvel used to be named Miss Marvel, and she got started in the late 70s. And there's a whole bunch more. And Black Widow, everybody knows. If you're watching WandaVision, you guys watching WandaVision?
Yes, love WandaVision.
No? Okay, well, they just... this won't spoil it for you because you won't know what I'm talking about. But they just introduced a character named Photon. You don't know her name is Photon yet in the show, but her name is Photon. And back in the 80s, in the comic books, she led the Avengers. And so it's not... For me, that I want to write a superhero novel. And so I looked at what was out there, and I saw the tropes that were out there. And I saw this sort of... All the male superheroes were what we call high-tech wonders, right? Which armored superheroes who use their engineering. Tony Stark.
Yeah.
And then all the female superheroes were Supergirl, right? Or some variation. I love Supergirl. So, I'm not knocking on her at all. She's one of my favorite characters when they do it right anyways. And which is kind of true for all characters, right? It's especially these legacy characters that have been around forever and ever. It really is a lot about who's writing them and do they love that character. But excuse me. So when I was looking at it, I was like, well, what we need in this sort of, fictionalized superhero universe is we need a woman who is a genius who makes her own suit of armor. And I was like, because at the time, the only armored superhero, there was 2 or 3 armored superheroes in books anyways, and they were all men. And there was a whole bunch of Supergirl knockoffs. And I've always, actually, my first book that is kind of unreadable at this point, way back when, and I think I wrote it in 2013, was a Supergirl story, right? Guys love the super strong woman. They just do. Supergirl is just, it's comic book guys just love that. They love that she's, who she is. So my first one was that. But then when I sat down to seriously write about this armored superhero who was fighting this conspiracy against the world, basically, I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted her to be constantly evolving her armor because I feel like that's the thing that people love the most about Iron Man is always what's he going to come up with next, which is where the name Arsenal came from. And the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted her to have as many challenges outside the suit as inside the suit. And when I came up with her origin, Allie, have you read the beginning of the book at all?
I've read the whole book.
Oh, awesome! Did you like it?
I loved it. And I don't like superheroes, so.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I guess
it.
I am wrong on that one then, and that's okay. I am happy to be wrong if it means you like my book.
It really did.
Though you were forced to read it, I'm just saying, that inner critic, right?
But now she might buy the next 8, so it all
yeah,
Definitely.
That's the goal. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much. I appreciate that. It's always nice to hear. So when I sat down to create her, that was my thought process. And then in the beginning of the book, you find out that she was in a car accident when she was a kid, and her back was broken. Spoiler alert. And the one of the things I didn't want to do was I didn't want to have a lot of times in movies and TV shows and even in comics, somebody will suffer like a really bad injury, and then by the end of the story arc, the injury is resolved. They did that with Felicity Smoke in Arrow, where she got her back broken, and then someone came up with like a magic chip that allowed her to walk again.
Funny.
And so there's never going to be a situation where she cures her walking, so to speak. And I did a lot of research on paraplegia. I spoke to several women who were in wheelchairs from all angles, asking them questions, and they were happy. They're more than happy to speak to me. And that's one of the things as an author you really got to do is your research. And I learned a lot too. It was really interesting. I didn't realize, I think like a lot of people think that paralyzation is paralyzation, but it's not. There are very few people who actually have absolutely no feeling at all from the waist down. Like 90% of people who are in a wheelchair can feel something, have some kind of movement, even if it's involuntary. And so that was really interesting to add in there to give it a little bit of veracity.
Yeah, I like the juxtaposition you were saying of, she's so unlimited outside her chair, but limited in real life in her chair. That was a very interesting character arc. I also really, really enjoyed the fact that, she's you're representing kind of a group that's probably not written very often as main characters is, people who are stuck in a wheelchair, paraplegics, and having represented that group of people, I think was fascinating.
Well, and none of that. I mean, everything I do in books is generally intentional and for a reason, but it's always to serve the story. My main character, Amelia Lockhart, is half Hispanic. My wife is half Hispanic, and she's my inspiration for virtually everything I do. And so I kind of wanted to do something like that so that it's something to make her stand out a little bit, and same thing with all of the characters I have. I'm not purposely trying to say anything or have inclusivity. I'm just trying to be realistic. So when you have a superhero team based in Arizona, if there aren't a lot of Hispanic people around, you've never been to Arizona. If you have a superhero team based in New Orleans and there aren't a lot of African Americans and Creole and Black people around, then you've never been to New Orleans. So I mean, I just try to keep things realistic and appropriate for whatever area it is. The nice thing about writing in the real world, so to speak, slightly out of phase alternate reality that mimics our real world, is that I can get on Google Maps and I can go everywhere. And I also, whenever I meet anybody from anywhere, I always ask them this really important question. And I learned so much from asking people this question. And the question is, what is it about where you're from that you could tell me that no one could possibly know unless you live there?
I love that.
And you get a lot of great answers. For instance, when I was in England, I did not know that the little carts that sell hamburgers and hot dogs on the side have these little things with onions in them, and that they cook them. They cook the onions separate, and they leave them to sit and stew in the sauce. And you go and you get the burger, and then they put the onions on top of it. And you wouldn't know, because in America, if you order onions on your burger, it's either a fresh uncooked onion or it's sauteed with the burger. So yeah. Anyways, stuff like that.
Funny.
Wow, that's weird.
So you didn't know we had that difference, huh, Ali?
Mm.
That's amazing. No, I and hey, that's one way to write off your trip when you're going places.
Well, I went to England a long time ago. That was before I was a writer, but I was just using an example because Ali is from England, and
Yeah.
I thought maybe she would know what I was talking about. At least I hoped I remembered it right. So you get those little pieces. It goes back to authenticity, right? The more real world things that are in there, the more real things that feel real. People have a way of spotting stuff that's made up. Now, not all the time, but they have a way of spotting things that are made up.
Yeah.
And a lot of times things are too convenient for the plot, and so they're made up to be convenient for the plot. And it's really great when you can take something real and then make it apply to the plot. And most of my books, even the big military science fiction epic I'm working on right now for Aethon Books, is essentially based on all real world historical events that have happened in the past and multiple times, and I imagine will happen in the future. And that keeps things feeling like they exist and that they happen, and they're not just.
So it's
there's
believable.
There's a scene in Arsenal where they're on the couch watching this monster destroy people in Mexico, and I drew that from being on the couch watching when I was a kid watching Mount St. Helens explode. And yeah, you remember that? Remember what an epic sort of devastating moment that was?
I was in Billings, Montana, so we had all the ash falling on us walking to school.
Yeah, I was in Oregon. I was in Southern Oregon. So yeah, so you draw on those experiences to give your work. My editor says verisimilitude. The reality feeling, and then when you have to make something up, people skip right over it and they don't even realize that you made it up because everything up to that point's been real.
That brings us to world building, if we can chat about that. And also, I read on your Goodreads that you were a pantser, and I wondered if you still are. And you had actually a really good blog that I shared with our group a few weeks back, maybe a couple months ago, because I thought it was really good. And you had said about if you feel like you're conforming to structure and that's stifling you, then you may not have a thorough enough understanding of the story you're trying to tell. And I've always considered myself more of a storyteller than know exactly how to do all the beats and stuff like that. And so it really touched home with me because although I do try to plot a tiny bit to start with, but it touched home with me. I just really felt like, that's so true. You have to know your story and what are you trying to tell, or at least let the story evolve before you conform it perhaps at the end of what you're trying to do. But I wanted to get your viewpoint and if that's evolved since you've written that, or how your writing process is for developing the worlds that you're creating.
Well, thank you for reading my blog, Z. I appreciate that. No,
I was one of two, maybe. I don't know.
I do have views and ideas that have evolved as I've become a writer, as I've written more books, I should say. One of them is an understanding of why there isn't really anybody teaching people how to write novels. You get lots of courses, Brandon Sanderson's courses and stuff like that, on storytelling and like writing your first novel, but not a lot on going on from there. And that's because I feel like there's like levels of being an author, and I call it leveling up, to borrow a game term. And every time I write a book, I tend to level up and get a better understanding of how things work and how story works. And you can't really break it down into like a one sentence, like show not tell thing, because, well, okay, show not tell is great, but it's also not always true. And there are plenty of times that telling is what you want to do. And so it's like, so my blog was about structure, right? Was about this. People have this idea that structure is some sort of like, I have to conform to some structure. I'm writing a format, and that's not true at all. Structure is how we as human beings recognize things, right? So when you go to a movie, did either of you see that Quentin Tarantino movie in the theater that's told out of order? Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Have either of you seen that?
Mm-hmm. Have you seen it, Allie?
I have. Yeah, I have.
Long time ago.
Yeah, first time I watched it, I was like, what the heck is going on? Where is this? Why are they, what? And that's because he purposefully tells it out of order. Mm-hmm. And because he tells it out of order, it really shocks your brain. And that was great for that story. Most people can't, like 99.99% people can't tell a story that way. It's never going to work. But a lot of people try. So he screwed up. He didn't screw up the format. He changed the format to make people aware of the format. Mm-hmm. But when I'm writing a book, I have a format, and I know, because the way Western audiences read stories, because of Greek literature, we are programmed to follow a pattern when we're reading. Mm-hmm. And when you get out of sync with that pattern, the reader doesn't know you're out of sync. They just know there's something wrong with the book. Now, they'll never be able to tell you. They'll never be able to say, like, well, you missed your plot point on whatever page or something. They won't be able to tell you that. They'll just say the book was boring, or the pacing was wrong, or it was too long, or it was too short, or something. Because people are terrible at telling you what's wrong with something. They just know that there is something wrong with it. So the format is for people. That blog was for people who think that formatting is somehow a stifle or somehow stops creativity. And it doesn't. It's a form. I think I mentioned this in the blog because it's my favorite thing to say about this. Is it's a cup, and you can put anything you want in that cup, and the cup can be made of anything. You can make a cup out of rock and put lava in it. You can make a cup out of glass and put acid in it. It can be made out of anything. And so it's really important to know what format a story should take, so that as you're writing it and as the reader is reading it, you're not trying to have to recreate the wheel in the reader's mind, because that will bore them. And so the more you can stick to the right kind of 3-act sort of traditional Greek structure for storytelling, the more your reader will engage with the story, because their entireness of their brain and their focus will be on what you're saying and not how you're saying it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So they'll be more focused on you, your characters, your story, what you're trying to say, and less focused on, wait a minute, what happened to, there's no conflict, there's no growth, there's no whatever plot point is missing. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
But do you
and
think
to answer your other question, oh, sorry, Z, go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think readers are savvy enough, though, to know what's missing? Or they, like you said, I guess they just know to say, oh, it was boring, or it lagged in the middle, or something like that?
Well, think about movies that you've not liked. Why is it so hard for movies to end right? Mostly because they didn't begin right, to be honest. Endings usually fail because the beginning isn't right. But everybody can spot the problem. Telling you what the problem is completely different. Even other writers won't be able to do it. It's something where you have to really understand story structure, like the back of your hand, and always be striving to learn more and become more familiar with it. And the answer to your question is, I am a pantser, and I'll probably always be a pantser. I've tried really hard to be a plotter, really hard. I have had tremendous bouts of writer's block for months at a time because I tried so hard to be a plotter. And I just can't seem to make it work. So I found a way for me that works, where basically I sit down, I have an idea, I sit down and start writing, and I get about 5,000 or 6,000 words in, and I know what the story's about, and I know who the characters are, and then I start over. And I write to structure, right? So I'm the opening page is writing to be the hook. And once you get through the hook, you're writing toward the inciting incident. And once you get through the inciting incident, you're writing toward the first plot point. And then you're writing toward the second plot point. And then you're writing toward the middle. And then the third plot point. And then the dark moment. And then the end. That's what you're writing for. And while I don't know what specifically is going to happen at any one of those given moments, I know what the moment is supposed to feel like and what it's supposed to read like. So, and that's what I'm writing for.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, but specifically for fantasy or sci-fi, I suppose, too. And you said you're moving on now. You've moved on. You're writing an epic fantasy? Or
not moving on. So my readers are watching this. Not moving on. Still writing superhero stuff. In fact, I just you were part of my 24-hour write-a-thon. That was a superhero book. That was book 5 in the Superhero by Night series.
Okay.
And that is complete.
Reading it.
Say again?
I was really enjoying reading it as you were writing it.
Right on. Yeah, it turned out pretty good. And I finished it a couple days ago, and it's off to the editor. So which was pretty fast even for me. But no, I've always wanted to write military sci-fi, and I had a great opportunity to work with these guys at Athon Books, who they've had, some of their books have won dragons. They've got Nebula Award winners. They've got a lot of the Nathan Fillion did an audiobook for them. He did one of their audiobooks, so they got Lou Diamond Phillips. They published a Lou Diamond Phillips science fiction novel that he wrote with his wife. So it was a great opportunity with them. They specialize in military sci-fi and space opera. And so, so I'm writing my military sci-fi for them. It's taking me a little bit longer because I was doing really good, and then 2020 happened and it kind of slapped me in the face.
As most of us, Well, I
Yeah.
was wondering though about the, and I'm not sure now so much of military sci-fi because I'm not familiar with that as much, but with your superhero books, even, was there an element where you had to sit down and decide, okay, here are the fantastic elements that are going to exist different from our world, or did they just come out as you were pantsing through it? I read something recently. It said that, as a fantasy writer, it's okay to just start. And as you come upon a problem in your story, you realize you have to have an element, something in it, like, okay, now I need to develop what the magic is, or now I need to develop a language or whatever, and kind of do it along the way as you come up upon it rather than figuring out this whole world before it. So I suppose there's probably people on both ends of the spectrum, but I just wondered what your process or thought is about that.
Yeah, there are people on both ends of the spectrum because and not one way works for every writer. There's this thing called open mode, and open mode is when you are working and your brain is playing, and it's coming up with ideas, it's coming up with stuff. You'll get this about 15 minutes of writing in the morning. After about 15 minutes of writing, you're probably in open mode. You're getting good ideas, things are flowing, that kind of stuff. Some people call it flow state.
Flow.
And that's when you come up with your best ideas. When you're in closed mode is your problem solving mode, right? Closed mode is you go out to your car and your car won't start. What do? Closed mode is you wake up to your kid splashing in water in your room and your room has no water in it. Closed mode is that kind of stuff. You're problem solving. And so it's very hard to be creative in closed mode because your brain switches over to the sort of logical step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, panic, So what I do is I get a general idea because the stuff I come up with in closed mode tends to be the low-hanging fruit, the easiest idea to come up with. Oh, why are there superpowers? Well, this mysterious event happened and all of a sudden everybody had superpowers. And that's a theme you see a lot in superhero books. And I didn't like that. No offense to superhero authors who wrote that. That's just my opinion. As is everything I say, clearly. But so I wanted to go the Marvel and DC route where superpowers just were. Now, eventually, you do find out the cause of superpowers, and I have to say it was pretty cool coming up with that. But I left it vague because I wanted to leave it for later. It wasn't something that had to. If you don't have to explain and define something, then don't. All you're going to do is pigeonhole yourself and get yourself in trouble. So I tend to write until I have a thing that needs to be solved, and I kind of let the story solve it. So and sometimes, a lot of times, I'll give problems to the characters that I don't know how to fix it when the problem arises, and that takes some work. And that's what the try fail cycle is for.
Yeah.
Is they try something, it doesn't work. They try something, it doesn't work. And so I don't always know if there's what solution is when I give them problems, but. So to answer your question, yeah, it's all pantsed. I try not to world build before I start writing because I find that once you say something or write something down, it kind of becomes really, really hard to break from that. So even if, for me anyways, even if I was going to completely ignore my world building, once I've written it down, it's like my brain wants to use that idea because I took the effort to write it down. So I world build it as I go. Now, the military sci-fi, though, that's superheroes. My superhero novels are 50 to 60,000 words. I can keep one in my head while I write it. It's no big deal. My military sci-fis are like 110,000 words. I cannot keep the entire book in my head. And so I have a 12-page world-building document that I annotate every time I make something up so that I have a consistent idea of how everything works. I still make it up as I go along, but I write it down so that I have it recorded for the next time I come into that problem. Because if I get 80,000 words in, I will have forgotten that I solved this problem at 20,000 words. And then I'll solve it a different way, and then the story is just garbage. So,
Speaking of your writing process, so I know that you did do these 2 24-hour days of writing over the past year, right? Wasn't there a first one? Because
there was just one.
Oh, that was the only one. Okay.
Google or YouTube, the hotel hosed me on my internet connection, and so YouTube ended up breaking the video into 2, and then I lost like 6 hours of it. Unfortunately, I was pretty bummed about that. But But yeah, that's why there are two videos, part 1 and part 2. I am going to do another one.
Are you?
Probably in May, because it was a lot of fun. But I'm just going to do it from my house and just send my kids to their aunt's house and let her deal with them for a couple of days.
Oh, I thought it was fun to watch. I just wondered if you thought, well, clearly you just said it was very productive for you because you ended up finishing the book quite early. And I don't know, I feel like there's a great amount of risk to doing this, especially live online, but and watching people, watching what you're writing. But I give you full props for, I mean, you're further ahead in your, writing than I am and your author journey than I am. But I don't know if I do it, but it looked like a lot of fun.
Well, I'm an extrovert, so take that with a grain of salt. I in 2020 was so hard on me because I couldn't see anybody, or it's like some guy at the Costco that I know, the checkout guy, he like patted me on the back the other day, and I was just like, oh, human contact. So being in front of people and potentially making a fool of myself is not really a problem for me. The one thing I was worried about the most was the writing. Was after 6 hours, it's going to be crap because I've never written longer than 6 hours before ever. When you're writing and you get that feeling in your brain like you've worked out, but it's just your brain and everything, you get tired or whatever. I was really worried about that. And what's interesting thing I discovered, probably the thing I learned the most about doing the 24-hour writing, was that is entirely self-afflicted. I couldn't stop because people were watching, and therefore that never happened. And ever since then, my productivity has shot through the roof. I'm having 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 word days. I'm writing with the kids in the room. I'm writing without music. I'm writing at night. Things I never used to do.
Do you think that because you let yourself go for that 24 hours, that you made a new milestone in your writing then?
Yeah. So I mean, like, what excuse do I have to? Oh, I'm tired. Well, I've done that before. So it was really cool. It really stepped up my writing ability, I think, and also having people be there, kind of cheering me on, and then I got a lot of positive feedback from people about the story and about the characters, and there were a couple people there who wanted to be authors, and so it was really interesting for them to see the process. A couple people were like, "Wow, it's like strangely soothing to hear your keyboard,
ASMR."
Yeah, and so it was a great experience for me. I feel like it was a great experience for people who watched, but the biggest part of it was the learning that I could push my limits and do more on a daily basis. Because my biggest thing about being an author is that I feel like I don't produce fast enough. I want to produce more. When you get to the point where you're okay, like the first 2 years I was an author, I wrote 6 books a year, and I really wanted to write more books than that, but I couldn't write faster. I wrote as fast as I could. And now I'm in the situation where I'm like, okay, I have these 3 military sci-fi books to finish. I'm halfway through book 2, and I've got 3 more superhero novels to write this year. I've got 2 super secret projects I can't talk about right now because they're for a publisher. But when I do, you're going to be blown away. They're awesome. All that has to be done this year. Plus, there's like this other superhero series I wanted to finish. I've got a lit RPG I'm like 90,000 words into that I want to finish. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll have to do that next year in 2022. Well, wait a second. And then by the time I get to the end of 2021, there's going to be like 4 more books I'm going to write. And all of a sudden, like my writing career is planned out for the next 6 years. And while they're all books I want to write, it's not all the books I want to write.
Yeah.
And so being able to produce a lot more, if I can average 6,000, 7,000 word days, then I'll get to write a lot more of the stories that I want to write. Not that I have to write the superhero stuff. Well, I mean, I guess I technically do because I'm contracted to do it. But it also makes money, which is nice. But there's other things I want to do, and time doesn't seem to be on my side. So I must go faster.
Okay, we do have a question from Morningstar. She says, what's your experience with Audible? And I did see that all of the Full Metal Superhero is on Audible, all 9 books. And then you mentioned the next one, the Superhero at Night is also. And you mentioned that you had a partnership with somebody to produce those. And how did that go?
Yeah, Tantor Media is my audiobook producers. They're the second largest producer of audiobooks behind Audible. And my audiobooks are actually available wide. So Full Metal Superhero and Superhero by Night are available everywhere audiobooks are sold, including Chirp, which is a great one for deals. I was surprised to learn that all my audiobooks are 99 cents on Chirp. And I was like, oh, hey, that's new. I really like Tantor. I do nothing with Audible. I have no relationship with them whatsoever. They are their own company, and Tantor handles all that stuff for me. There's a business aspect to this business, and the audiobooks was a bridge too far for me. Figuring out the audiobook business was just a bridge too far. I got the ebook business and the paperback business on lock. I understand writing. I understand advertising.
Yeah.
All that stuff. But then going in and producing, I produced one audiobook. It was not the best experience for me.
So it's
I'm
easier
happy
to turn it over. Yeah.
I just make sure that, I don't know if you know who Christine Catherine Roosh is, but she runs a blog called Chris Writes. And it's an amazing business blog. She's been a writer and agent and editor for 30 years. She's super, super smart. And she wrote a whole blog series on negotiating for what you want. And so it's really important when you get approached by a company and they want to license your product or form a deal with you that you get what you want out of it. Otherwise, what's the point? And so when Tantor approached me about doing the Full Metal Superhero, I made sure I had the audio narrator approval because I had a friend named Debbie Cassidy who lives in England, writes urban fantasy.
Allie knows her.
I totally know her.
Small world. Oh
yeah, we're really good friends. We both did Kindle Scout the same month.
Oh.
And we've been chatty buddies ever since. And I love Debbie.
Oh my gosh.
And she had one of her book series. She gave it to the audio, and it came back, and the person didn't do a British accent or something. I forget what it was, but it was a disaster.
Oh no.
And she didn't have any rights in the contract to change it. And so I remember thinking like, well, if I do that, I got to make sure I have the right to. And so when they approached me, I was like, listen, there's 2 things I have to have. One is I have to have narrator approval, and the other is if you sell your company, the rights are mine. They don't get to go with your company.
Really good points.
And they said sure. And it wasn't that big of a deal with Arsenal. There wasn't anything specific about Amelia that needed to be have a specific narrator. So I got Amelia Beresford is the narrator for it. I love her. She does great things with that character. And
I was listening to it today.
Oh, right on. Yeah, she's fantastic. And Arsenal is she sounds like a little girl in my head, kind of, so to speak. And so Emily Beresford's high pitched sort of Arsenal voice nailed it. But then she does her Kate and her Domino character, and I'm just like, after I heard the first book, I messaged Emily and I was like, Emily, I am forever going to hear your voice as these characters. It's just, so you better be able to do all the books. And then with Wraith, I really had I really wanted a voice actress who was African American to play the character. The character's African American, and I felt like it would be an injustice to do it wrong. Plus, also, she's from Louisiana, so I was hoping I could get a voice actress with an accent. Yeah. And I found one, and she's amazing. Her name is Lacey Laurel, and she mostly does romance and other those kind of books. But she was great, and so when Tantor came to me and said, "Hey, we want to do the Wraith books," which was just at the end of 2020, they actually came to me. They wanted to do it sooner, but when 2020 happened, they weren't sure how things were going to shake out, so they stopped all audiobook production for a while. And but yeah, so they contracted me for 6 books, even though only 4 were out. And they're like, "Well, we can't get Lacey Laurel. We're going to use this other person." And I'm like, "No, you're going to get Lacey Laurel." Like, well, we really can't. And I'm like, well, maybe you could ask her. And because the first thing they told me was that I forget what it was, but it was something like, her schedule's not available or something like that. And I was like, yeah, maybe you could ask her, because I'd already contacted Lacey about it. It took a little while, but I got them to get Lacey on board, and I'm really glad they did, because she just does a fabulous job as the Wraith.
Well, now I want to get that one too, because I got the audiobook earlier today and was listening to it all day to kind of catch up on my reading, and it was really good. I really like audiobooks.
Me too.
Okay, we have some more questions coming here, so I want to make sure we get to them all. Allie Alexa Spriggs says, Jeff, how do you write your superhero fight scenes? Because she's struggling.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it, and thank you for thinking that I can answer it. Short and sweet, and to the point. Fight scenes can be complicated, but they have to be complicated in small chunks. So one of the things that I did when I was newer to writing is that I'm cinematic, right? I'd see in my right hand punches and blocks and all that stuff. And then you try to read it back out loud, and you're like, this is terrible. His right hand, threw out at a 45-degree angle and blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, no. It's the time to be Hemingway when you're doing fight scenes, punch, kick, jab, dodge, twist, slam, that kind of thing. Use those kind of active verbs that, give a real visual sense, keep your sentences short, and, keep your introspection to zero. And you'll find your punch scenes your fight scenes go a lot quicker, depending on the kind of fight scene you're writing. Now, if you're writing something like Princess Bride with the witty banner and the swords, obviously that changes things a little bit. You want to keep in the witty banner, but anything you do that isn't describing an action is slowing the fight down. So, and you want to avoid that. Fights, like anything else, have a flow to them. And they build in crescendo, right? They build to a crescendo. And so you want to use that knowledge to have how fights go to make the fight scene better. So keep it short in the beginning, get a little bit longer as the fight goes on, and then you end it sharply. And, with however you want to end it, with a clear victory or not or whatever, but, you don't linger on the ending for 5 pages. Just like you don't linger once you finish the story in your writing, you end the book. You don't keep going. And if you've ever seen a movie or read a book where the ending just felt like it took forever, Man of Steel, that's why. Because the emotional moment of the movie ended. It ended, in Man of Steel's case, it ended with Lois and Clark kissing. That was the end of the movie right there. And then it went on for another 20 minutes. So fight scenes are the same way. You'll get there's an emotional arc in fight scenes in the fight, and once you hit that beat, the fight scene needs to be over. You can't just have it keep going on and on and on and on.
Interestingly, sex scenes are the same way for romance authors.
Well, so, I don't write those, so
no, but I'm just telling
know.
you what you just described could have been the same. No, but Allie
well, I mean, it's because everything is an emotional journey with human beings. Whether it's fighting or sex or storytelling or car chases or whatever, it's all an emotional journey, and you only resonate with your readers if you take them on that emotional journey and they go with you. And if you deviate from what they expect on that emotional journey, then you've lost them.
Yeah.
And
Allie's writing a book about dragon. It has a dragon. I'm thinking, Allie, you need to put like a fight scene. I think you might have one in mind. So this has all been interesting to listen to Jeff's way of doing this.
And there are a lot of ways of doing it. And I totally recommend finding books on craft and reading them. I read a new craft book between every one of my books that I write, because one of the things that you need to do if you want to be successful in this business is you need to always be improving. You'd be afraid to experiment and to write something badly, because that's the only way you'll ever get better is if you write bad. And reading craft books by really great authors like Donald Mass, who's not an author, he's an agent, but he knows he knows this stuff. And other authors, that's going to help you become a better writer. And it takes a while to like internalize a lot of this stuff and implement it. But once you do, you kind of just do it. You don't have to think about it.
Jocelyn says, I'm a slow writer. Speeding up the process has always slowed me down, if that makes sense. And she says that her issue is describing setting, especially.
I wish I could help you more in that, but I have that same problem. Every chapter is supposed to open with a description of a setting. in some way to clue the audience into where they are when the chapter opens. And I always forget to do that. I jump right into what the characters are doing and, what they're saying and things like that. So all I can tell you is don't do it. Just write without it and then save that for the second pass.
Mm-hmm.
Save that for when you edit. Know that you don't write settings, so don't try. And then when you're reading it over again, when you're doing your edits, just have a note to yourself telling you, hey, don't forget to set the scene when the scene needs to be set. And it's easier to do that on a pass after you finish the book than it is to keep stopping and struggling with the scene to get the setting, to set the scene and get that right before moving on to the rest of it. So there are some things some people find easier to skip than others. I can't skip science. I have to know how things work when the situation comes up with it. I can't just put brackets science here and move on. It doesn't. Some people can do that.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
But things like scene setting is one of my check marks when I do my edits. Is like, don't forget to set the scene. Don't forget to tell people where you are. The book I just wrote, the Apex Predator one, it ends with a giant storm in Louisiana, and I kept getting these scenes where I was like, oh, hey, I completely forgot there was a storm, and they're in the middle of a hurricane, and yeah, so they'd be soaking wet, and so it's just like it slows you down to try to remember all that stuff. So skip it and just save it for the edits.
Yeah. Speaking of your process, how about beta readers? What is your editing process when you're all said and done? Do you still use a developmental editor?
I'm going to say something really controversial, and I apologize ahead of time. I don't like beta readers. I don't like writers groups. I don't like anybody reading my book, actually, except for the people who are going to buy it. I don't use developmental editor. I've never used a developmental editor. I didn't know actually that was a thing when I started writing. But at the same time, I have read hundreds of books on storytelling, and I wanted to be a screenwriter once upon a time, so I understood story structure really, really well. And usually what developmental editors help you with is story structure.
Yeah.
So that's not a humble brag or anything. That's just my particular circumstance. Other people are better at other things than I am. If you need a developmental editor, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you feel like you need a developmental editor, you're not ready to publish yet. Because there's a difference between developmental editor and then somebody going over your manuscript and going, oh, hey, this could have been better, or that could have been better. That's a little bit different. I don't like beta readers because I find that the feedback people give is never useful. And you can go mad trying to please everybody who gave you feedback. Huh. When you hand a book to somebody and say, hey, could you critique this for me? Guess what they're going to do? They're going to critique it for you. And they're going to find every single thing wrong with it because they're trying to impress you. And either they're trying to impress you, or they're trying to prove that they're smarter than you, or they're trying to prove that they're a better writer than you. You name it. Now, having people read your book because you wrote a book and you weren't sure how the character pulled off, and you want some of your fans to read it before you release it, so that you know that they like it. That's totally fine. But like having a regular beta crew, I don't do that. I write a book, I give it to my editor. He looks it over, makes sure I don't have any plot holes or anything like that. And he makes some suggestions. Maybe expand this thought here, Jeff, or maybe write more on this scene, or I really like this part. Maybe you could do more with that, or you don't need this. And I'll go through and I'll make most of the changes he suggests because me and him are on a good wavelength. And then I'll send it back and he copy edits it, and then I just accept all those changes. I don't even look at them because it's not worth my time. I trust him. And then I run it through Grammarly, and then I if I've got time, I read it out loud and make sure I've got the vast majority of typos gone. And then I publish it. And I try to get through the editing phase as quickly as possible because having a completed book burns a hole in my pocket.
Yeah, that's amazing. It is interesting to get feedback for sure. And I often wonder, is there a point in your author journey where you feel like solid enough in your ideas and confident enough in your ideas that you wouldn't necessarily reach out to people or?
Yeah, I think feedback? So. It also depends on who you're reaching out. So so I'm here on my author journey, right? And if I reach out to somebody who's here, is their feedback going to be useful? And if I reach out to somebody who's here, am I going to understand their feedback? Am I going to have the context to understand their feedback? And also, we don't really have a way of knowing where people are on their journey other than through looking at their sales. And there's a lot of authors who just released a book and they sold 10,000 copies, and now they just release books. And indies tend not to talk about craft a lot, so it's hard to get into a craft conversation with indie authors and have any kind of central context. If I start talking about head hopping when it comes to POV, most people know that you're not supposed to change POV in a scene, and so that's wrong. Well, no, actually, no, it's not. You can change POV within a scene, even within a paragraph. There's a special way to do it, and that's craft. And so it depends on who you're getting feedback from. If they're below your level, the feedback you're going to get is going to be the same kind of feedback if you gave Stephen King feedback. You're not going to understand the level he's at, and he's not going to understand the level you're at, and people below you don't understand the level you're at. So it's tricky. And then if they catch you on a bad day and they savage you, and all of a sudden your inner critic's like, you know what? They're right. You suck. You just need to get another job and get out of this writing game forever.
Yeah.
How embarrassing for you, they can derail you. I used to be part of a writers group, and if my friend is listening, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to use your name. But they just, at this point, I had already been on the USA Today bestseller list, and I had already been published with Amazon. And so I was part of this writers group, and I was writing this new book, kind of like this sort of Shadowrun-esque sci fantasy in the future with this elven girl who does magic and this Navy diver. And they read the opening scene and they just tore it apart. And you've read my books, and I know that a man's perspective on women, you got to be careful with it, because we're salacious even when we don't intend to be. That's just the nature of who we are. We can't help it sometimes, but I try. And they every little thing, like every bad thing you could think of, the way to describe somebody's writing when writing a woman, they would say, you're doing this and blah, blah, blah. And it was so horrific to me as a writer. I didn't write for 6 weeks because of it. Now, I am a published author. This is my job. I have to do it every day. I can't afford to not. And so that's when I decided I was never doing feedback again, ever. Because while I seem confident, I am most days. I also have issues with depression, and thanks, Mom. And it's genetic. And so I can't risk somebody coming back and just because they want to impress me or something, or they want to show that they're better than me or whatever, tearing my manuscript apart, because you can with any manuscript. And shattering me like that again, because I got mouths to feed and bills to pay, and money doesn't grow on trees, as the song says. So that's my thing about feedback. And honestly, that's my experience with feedback my whole life. It just never really bothered me before, because I wasn't a writer. I wasn't an author before. But once you hit the USA Today bestseller list and you're, selling a bunch of books, and then people you really trust and opinions you value just tear into you, it's like,
yeah.
I don't need you people. So you kind of have to trust yourself. At some point, you have to trust yourself. Trust that you know what's best for your story.
Yeah.
And also trust that if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. There's always another book to write.
Aww. And on that note, we have kept you an hour and 15 minutes, and I've hit all my questions. Allie, any final questions?
I do not think so. I think all my questions have been answered.
Oh, good. Make sure you say hi to Debbie next time you talk to her.
I may have just done that.
Oh.
Oh, that's awesome. What a small world that was.
Right.
Your journey's been amazing to watch, and I really appreciate your time and getting all of your feedback and interesting observations and insights. And I know that our writer group will enjoy hearing some of your insights.
And feel free to reach out to me on Facebook if you have any questions. Any of your writer group are welcome to.
Okay.
I'm not always on Facebook anymore. I really have started to hate Facebook, but I keep Messenger on my phone. So if you have a question, or you need some advice, or you just want someone to talk to about this stuff, anybody, this goes for everybody, feel free to reach out to me. Reach out to whoever you think will help you in the author community, because all of them, like virtually all of them, want to give back. Like I have reached out to people who are 7-figure authors, and they took like 6 hours of their time to talk to me. That's exaggeration, but you know what I mean? Like people are happy to help when you want help. So reach out by all means, please do.
Oh, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. I have a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. We're going to sign off. And Jeff, I'm sure we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You both have a great day. Thank you very much.
You too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.